Hi, and welcome back to another tutorial from SQL Server 2012 tutorial.com. Today we are going to be talking about SQL Server 2012 Configuration Manager. So let's get going. As far as the Configuration Manager, this really combines three utilities from the older days. The first one is going to be the client network utility. This is basically you can configure SQL services for the client. It also combines server network utility. This is typically used when you are done setting up a SQL server and you have to set up protocols like TCP/IP, named pipes, etc. And then finally the service manager. And this is the important one where you can basically start and stop services, including the database engine, the agent, and whatnot. Okay. So as far as SQL Server Configuration Manager, what can you do with it? Well, you can do the following items. You can configure, like I mentioned, SQL services like MS SQL Server Service. This is the actual database engine that processes everything that happens in SQL Server. You can also control service like SQL Server Agent, and if you're not familiar, the SQL Server Agent is what will actually schedule jobs, maintenance plans, things of that nature. So this is the first item that you can control with the Configuration Manager. You can also configure, like I mentioned, SQL Server Network configuration. Okay, this is actually at the server level. What this means is that you can define which network protocol you would like to use. Let's say you are using a TCP/IP. You can also define what particular port that SQL Server Service is listening on. And then moving on, the last thing it does is that you can configure native client 11 configuration. So this is again this is at the client level. Once you are done configuring the server, you pretty much have to match the values at the client level. In other words, if you are running, let's say, TCP/IP on the server, but you're using named pipes at the client, the setup will not work, and there will be lack of communication between the components. Now, an important point to note here is that you should always use SQL Server Configuration Manager to change any of the accounts that are associated with SQL Server services, and we will look at these in a minute. How do you launch the manager? Well, you're going to go to All Programs, SQL Server, and then Configuration Tools, and then SQL Server Configuration Manager. Okay, so let's actually do that, and then well, let me talk about a few more things. But using the manager, you can start, stop, pause, and resume services. You can also configure the SQL Server services to start automatically or manually. You can definitely change the accounts that are associated by these services. You can disable the service or even change some of the settings. And then one more item is to be able to start SQL Server using certain trace flags. Trace flags basically add a little bit of configuration. So maybe an example is, let's say you want to start SQL Server in single user mode. Maybe you are trying to troubleshoot some items. That may be an example for that. And then obviously you can use the manager to view properties of these services also. So just a little FYI, let's jump into a demo. I'm basically using SQL Server 2012 on a Windows Vista Business Edition, so this may look different depending on what you're using, but let's go ahead and click on the Start button, All Programs. We'll look for Microsoft SQL Server 2012, Configuration Tools, and then SQL Server Configuration Manager. Okay, it may ask you Windows needs your permission, and I will hit continue on this. Okay, so let's go through these tabs one by one. Like I mentioned, it does three things. Okay, this first tab is where you will control services. The third one is where you actually control protocols and aliases again at the client level, and this middle one is where you control these at the server level. Okay, so first let's go in here. Let me talk about these services first. The main service is the MS SQL Server service, which right now it is running. This is the database engine service. If I you can right click on it and you can stop this. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. If you do that, now you can see everything is stopped. If you go to your management studio, and let's say we have Northwind database, and I try to create basically either connect or create a new query, it is not going to work. Okay, in fact it's going to give me an error because even you can see it at this level that the service is stopped. You can see it's a red circle with a white stop button on it. Okay, I'll give it a second to see if it responds or not. And so see, now you have this error. It says failed to connect to server laptop PC, network related issue occurred. Right now we will go back to the configuration manager, right click on it and start the service. Okay, and if you go back to Management Studio, by the way, if you have not seen Management Studio, you go to Start, All Programs, SQL Server 2012, and then Management Studio. Okay, that's how you launch it. Now if I right click on it and do a new query, this seems to work. Okay, because the actual underlying service is running, and you can see that here too. You can see the green circle with the white arrow. That means the service is operational. Now a couple of things let me mention is you can also right click here and go to properties. Okay, you can choose your service to run under a specific account, which is the preferred option, or for us we are just using it under the network service. You can also change the startup mode. For us it's automatic. You could disable it. You could even run it manually. You can control some startup parameters like I mentioned, and some of the other topics in here. Okay, and now some of these other services, let's look at the first one. This is the integration services that has to do with SSIS. Currently we will not be running this, but possibly in future. On a similar line, you have the reporting service that is also not running. The SQL Server browser service, which basically lets you see the service on a network, and then the agent service, like I mentioned, which controls all the automation and maintenance plans. Let me go ahead and possibly run this. And a lot of these services you can do the same thing. You can go to properties, and you can change the behavior. And let's say we want to switch this to automatic. Okay, so I will do that. I will apply, hit OK. Now this time when your machine starts and when the server starts, this should run automatically. Okay, in our case we are going to right click and select start. So those are the services, and then we'll come back to some of these others in a minute, but let's go back